My boss summoned me into her office and stated, "We need to talk about what you did to your coworker's duck." My coworker, Gerald, had walked into the office 3 months earlier carrying a live duck. "Everyone meet Quackers," he had announced. "My anxiety support animal." The duck waddled straight to my desk, and I felt my throat instantly constrict. "I'm severely allergic to birds," I explained. By lunchtime, my eyes were swollen shut and I was wheezing. I stumbled into HR, barely able to see the manager through my puffy eyelids. "There's a duck," I gasped. "I'm allergic to birds. I can't breathe." She slid a bottle of Benadryl across her desk. "Gerald has documentation. You'll need to manage your symptoms." The next 3 months were hell. During my most important client presentation, I sneezed 17 consecutive times because Quackers was sitting under the conference table. The client asked if I was okay. I tried to say yes, but my face was so swollen I looked like I'd been in a car accident. We lost the account. And I complained to HR. Gerald overheard and cornered me by the elevator. "You're discriminating against my disability," he said, clutching Quackers to his chest. "That's illegal, you know." The duck quacked in my face, triggering such a severe allergic reaction that I had to leave work early. My coworker, Jennifer, started leaving rubber ducks on my desk with notes like, "Quackers says hi." One morning, I arrived to find my keyboard smeared with actual duck droppings. I brought it to HR with photos. "Can you prove it was Quackers?" the manager asked. I stared at her. "It's duck poop. There's one duck in this office." She said she'd look into it. Nothing changed. My doctor wrote a note stating my allergy was severe enough to be dangerous. HR told me to try a different antihistamine. And one morning I came in at 6:00 a.m. to finish a report, needing to work without Quackers nearby. The office was empty, beautiful, and silent. I made coffee in the break room and sat at my desk, finally able to breathe. Around 7:00 a.m., Gerald walked in with Quackers. "You're here early," he said cheerfully. The duck immediately waddled toward me, and my eyes began to water. An hour later, Gerald started screaming, "Quackers, Quackers!" I ran over. The duck was lying motionless on the floor near the break room. My boss called me into her office that afternoon. The HR manager was already there. "Where were you this morning?" my boss asked. "I came in early to work on the Garnington report." She turned her computer screen toward me. Security footage showed me alone in the break room making coffee, right where Quackers later died. "We're investigating whether you poisoned Gerald's duck." My mouth fell open. "I didn't touch that duck." Gerald filed a police report. The company suspended me. A detective appeared at my apartment with a folder bulging with my HR complaints. "You filed 16 complaints about this duck in 3 months, he said. "That's a lot of motivation." My coworkers posted on Facebook calling me a murderer. Someone left a dead rubber duck on my doorstep. I couldn't sleep, so I obsessively watched the security footage on my laptop. Then I noticed it. The timestamp jumped from 7:15 to 7:30. 15 minutes were missing. Digging through the company directory, I discovered that Justin from IT had the authority to delete footage. I'd heard him yelling about Quackers eating his lunch on multiple occasions. I waited for him in the parking lot after work. "Justin, I know you deleted that footage." His face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." I stepped closer. "The duck died right after that missing 15 minutes. What did you do?" He looked around and then his shoulders slumped in defeat. "It kept eating my food. I left out some stuff with rat poison in it. I didn't think it would actually eat it that fast. When Gerald started screaming, I panicked and deleted the footage. But everyone already hated you so." Next morning, I went straight to my boss and HR and told them everything. My boss looked at me as if I were insane. "So, you're saying Justin killed the duck and framed you, but you have no proof of this?" Justin denied the entire conversation had ever happened. He told HR I was harassing him and fabricating lies to save myself. The company was now on the brink of firing me for creating a hostile work environment. To make matters worse, Gerald showed up on my doorstep, suing me for $50,000 in emotional damages. Stood there with a woman in a gray suit holding a folder. My stomach dropped when I saw the legal papers. He shoved them at me, and I took them with trembling hands, seeing the bold words "Complaint 4DA MAGES" at the top. His face was red and wet with tears as he pointed a trembling finger at me. The woman gently touched his arm, and he turned away, his shoulders shaking as he walked down the steps. I watched them drive off in a BL. A car then closed the door and slid to the floor, the lawsuit papers heavy in my lap. The lawsuit claimed I had killed his duck on purpose out of hatred and demanded $50,000 for his pain and suffering. I read it 3 times, each pass making me feel sicker as it painted me as cruel and heartless, a person who would poison an innocent animal. Grabbed my phone from the coffee table, scrolling through my contacts for anyone who might know a lawyer. Starting at 8:00 p.m., I left frantic voicemails, my voice breaking and words tumbling out too fast. Most numbers went straight to voicemail. Their offices closed until Monday. My cousin, who had gone to law school, did real estate work and told me to find a criminal attorney. I Googled lawyers in my area, cold calling the emergency numbers listed on their websites. One receptionist said consultation fees started at $500, and I immediately agreed, not even caring about the cost. Another office said they couldn't take new clients for 3 weeks. I left messages everywhere, explaining I was being sued and investigated for killing a duck I didn't kill. By 11 p.m., I was sitting in the dark, phone in hand, wondering if I should just give up. Then my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered so fast I nearly dropped it. A man's voice asked if I was the one who called about the duck case. I said yes. He introduced himself as Philip Kelly, saying my voicemail had caught his attention. We talked for 20 minutes as he asked basic questions about what happened, and he agreed to meet me the next morning at 7:00 a.m. I thanked him profusely, and he told me to bring every document related to the case. I arrived at Philip's office at 6:50 a.m., my backpack stuffed with papers and my laptop. His office was in an old downtown building that smelled of coffee and old books, with wooden furniture and shelves packed with legal volumes. Philip was perhaps 50, with gray hair and reading glasses, wearing a button-down shirt without a tie. He shook my hand, pointed to a chair, and poured me coffee from a pot on a side table. I explained everything from the beginning while he took notes on a yellow legal pad, his pen flying across the paper. He didn't interrupt once, just kept writing and nodding, his expression completely neutral. When I mentioned the missing 15 minutes in the security footage, his pen stopped. He looked up, his eyes sharp behind his glasses, and asked me to repeat that part. After I explained the timestamp jump and how I figured out Justin could delete footage, Philip leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen and staring at me as if deciding whether to believe me. He leaned forward and asked me to recount everything about Justin and the deleted footage again, word for word. I went through the entire parking lot conversation 3 times, repeating Justin's admission about the rat poison, his panic, and the deletion of the footage. Each time, Philip asked specific questions about Justin's exact words and body language, and whether anyone else was around or if I had recorded it. I told him Justin looked terrified at first, then relieved when he realized I had no proof. Philip set down his pen. He explained that if I was telling the truth, Justin had committed a serious crime by destroying evidence in a police investigation, evidence tampering, a felony that shows consciousness of guilt and could help prove my innocence. But he warned me that without proof of our conversation, it was my word against Justin's, and Justin had already told HR I was lying. And I asked what we could do. Philip said we needed to build a case showing Justin had the means, motive, and opportunity to kill the duck. The deleted footage proved someone tampered with evidence. If we could prove Justin did it, that would create reasonable doubt about my guilt. He spent the next 2 hours spreading documents across his desk, constructing a detailed timeline. I showed him all 16 of my dated HR complaints about the duck. He read through my medical records showing emergency room visits for allergic reactions, including one where my throat started closing. We watched the security footage together on my laptop, with Philip taking notes on the timestamp jump. He pointed out that the footage showed me making coffee and leaving the break room at 7:10, 5 minutes before the gap started. I showed him emails where I had begged HR to act on my allergy, and their responses telling me to just take more medicine. Philip nodded as he read. "This paper trail actually helps your case," he said. "It proves you wanted the duck gone through proper channels, not murder." He explained that if I had wanted to kill it, I wouldn't have spent 3 months filing complaints and visiting doctors. A murder doesn't create a documented trail of their motive. Philip outlined the path ahead. Gerald's lawsuit and the criminal investigation were 2 separate legal matters. The lawsuit was a civil case where Gerald had to prove I was responsible for his damages. The criminal investigation could lead to charges if the police believed they had enough evidence. He thought the civil case would likely be put on hold until the criminal investigation was resolved. When I asked about my suspension, Philip frowned, noting the company had suspended me without pay despite no charges being filed. He believed that was premature and potentially challengeable, but his immediate focus was the criminal investigation, as it posed the greater threat of jail time and a permanent record. Then came the question of cost. Philip didn't hesitate, quoting a $15,000 retainer to cover both the criminal defense and the response to the civil lawsuit. My chest tightened. It was a huge sum. He explained it would cover investigation, document review, court appearances, and negotiations. I thought of my savings account, $18,000 I had painstakingly built as an emergency fund. Being investigated for duck murder and sued for $50,000 certainly qualified. I told him I could pay the retainer. My hand shook slightly as I wrote the check, watching my financial safety net vanish, but I saw no other choice. Philip filed the check and said his first step was to contact Detective Dominique Braun, who was handling the criminal case, to request a formal meeting and present evidence of my innocence. He called the police station right then, introducing himself as my attorney in a calm, professional tone. After a brief conversation, he hung up and told me Detective Braun had agreed to meet with us in 3 days. He said that was surprisingly fast, suggesting she might have doubts about the case against me. 3 days felt like an eternity, but I nodded my thanks. His final instruction was stern. I was not to talk to anyone about the case, especially not Justin, Gerald, or anyone from work. Anything I said could be used against me. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. Suspended from work without pay, I was trapped in my apartment, terrified to leave after neighbors had seen the news coverage about the investigation. The second morning, I looked out my window and saw my car in the parking lot, vandalized with bright red spray paint spelling "Duck Killer" across the driver's side. My hands clenched into fists, a scream building in my throat, but I forced myself to grab my phone and take pictures. I called the non-emergency police line to file a vandalism report, but the officer sounded bored, and the patrolman who showed up hours later merely took photos and told me to contact my insurance company. I spent the rest of the day inside, ordering delivery, too scared to go to the grocery store. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from coworkers, some supportive but most accusatory or morbidly curious. I stopped reading them after a while. On the third day, my phone rang with another unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A woman's voice asked if I remembered her. It took me a moment to place it. Naomi, my ex-girlfriend. We had broken up 6 months earlier after dating for 2 years, but had stayed friendly. She said she'd seen my name in a news article about the investigation and wanted to check on me. My throat tightened and I blurted out, "I didn't kill the duck. I swear I didn't." Naomi said she knew I was innocent. She reminded me of when we'd had to put her cat down years ago and I had cried harder than she did. "There's no way someone who sobbed over a sick cat would poison a duck," she said firmly, offering to provide a character witness statement to the police, telling them I would never hurt an animal. Tears welled in my eyes and I had to blink them back, thanking her over and over. She said, "That's what friends do. We'll get through this together." After we hung up, I sat on my couch feeling slightly less alone, buoyed by the knowledge that at least one person believed me without question. That night, I pulled out my laptop and opened the security footage file for what felt like the 100th time. The screen glowed in my dark apartment as I watched myself walk into the break room at 6:15 a.m., alone and tired. I made coffee, poured it into my mug, and walked back to my desk. The timestamp read 6:17 a.m. I fast-forwarded through the next hour of me working at my desk. At 7:15 a.m., Gerald walked in carrying quackers. The duck waddled near my desk, and I could see my own face beginning to puff up even in the grainy footage. And the discrepancy that made my stomach drop occurred. The timestamp jumped from 7:15 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. in a single frame. 1 second, Gerald was setting quackers down. The next, the duck was lying on the floor near the break room, and Gerald was running toward it. 15 minutes were simply gone. I rewound and watched it again and again. The jump was obvious once you knew to look for it. At 7:15, the break room was empty. At 7:30, there was a paper plate on the counter that hadn't been there before. Someone had been in that room during the missing time, someone with the access to delete the security footage. My hands shook as I took screenshots of the timestamp jump, saving them to a folder on my desktop. This was proof, real proof that someone had tampered with the recording. I wanted to call Philip immediately, but it was nearly midnight, so I forced myself to wait until morning. My phone rang at 8:00 a.m. It was Philip, his voice all business. He told me he was hiring a digital forensics expert to examine the footage and verify the timestamp manipulation. When I asked the cost, he said $2,000. My savings account was already reeling from his retainer, but I told him to do it. He explained the expert verification was crucial. Without it, a court might not accept my screenshots as proof. I emailed him the footage file, and he said he would have results within 48 hours. I spent the next 2 days barely eating or sleeping, pacing my apartment and flinching at every phone buzz. Every notification could be the forensics report or another hateful message from a coworker. I abandoned social media entirely. Seeing people call me a murderer made my chest tighten and my breathing turn shallow. 24 hours later, my phone rang with Philip's number. The forensics expert had confirmed everything. The footage had been edited using administrator-level access to the security system. Her report stated the deletion occurred at 7:42 a.m., roughly 12 minutes after the duck died. Philip sounded uncharacteristically excited. "This proves someone with admin access deleted footage right after the incident," he said. He had already contacted Detective Braun and scheduled a meeting at the police station for the next morning. He told me to get some sleep because tomorrow was important. The police station smelled of burnt coffee and cleaning solution. Detective Braun met us in a small, worn conference room with gray walls. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp, observant eyes, dressed in a professional blazer. Philip slid the forensics report across the table. She read it meticulously, page by page, then asked detailed questions about Justin's access to the security system, his job responsibilities, and the times I'd heard him complain about the duck eating his lunch. I answered as clearly as I could, trying not to sound desperate or rehearsed. She took notes on a yellow pad, her expression neutral throughout. Finally, Detective Braun set down her pen and admitted something that made my throat tighten. They had never seriously investigated anyone but me. My clear motive, documented by all my HR complaints, and my presence alone in the break room that morning had made me the obvious suspect. Philip leaned forward. Being alone doesn't prove guilt, he countered. The deleted footage proves someone else had a reason to hide what really happened, someone with administrator access who panicked and tried to cover their tracks. Detective Braun nodded slowly. I see your point, she said. She agreed to interview Justin formally, but then delivered a blow to my rising hope. Without physical evidence linking him to the rat poison, the case was circumstantial. The deleted footage proved tampering, but not poisoning. She suggested we focus on finding proof of Justin purchasing or accessing rat poison, something concrete that put it in his hands. As we were walking out of the police station, a memory jolted me, and I stopped dead in the middle of the parking lot. Justin always complained about mice in the IT server room, I told Philip. He said they were chewing through cables. He mentioned setting traps down there. Philip immediately perked up. Would the company have records of pest control supplies purchased for that department? He asked. I confirmed that it had its own budget for maintenance, separate from general office supplies. Philip pulled out his phone, muttering about subpoenas and purchase orders as he began making notes. At afternoon, I called Morris from accounting and asked if he would meet me for coffee. After a long pause, he agreed. The next morning at the coffee shop, he looked deeply uncomfortable, his eyes darting around as if afraid we'd be seen together. I explained I needed information to clear my name and asked about IT department budgets. Shifting in his seat, Morris confirmed it had its own budget for maintenance, including pest control, and that Justin handled ordering supplies for the server room. He wouldn't look directly at me, his coffee sitting untouched between us. And I asked if he could access the purchasing records. Morris shook his head quickly. I can't get those without authorization, he said. But then he offered a helpful suggestion. The building manager oversaw all facility maintenance and supply orders for the entire building and might have the records I needed. Morris then finished his coffee in 3 quick gulps, wished me luck. And he hurried away before I could thank him properly. He clearly wanted no prolonged association with me. The building manager's office was in the basement next to the maintenance closets. Frank, a tired-looking man in his 50s with grease stains on his work shirt, seemed annoyed by my interruption. But when I explained I was trying to prove my innocence in a criminal investigation, his expression changed. He pulled up records on his ancient desktop, squinting and clicking through files. After a few minutes, he turned the monitor toward me, showing that the IT department had ordered rat poison 3 times in the past year. The most recent order was just 2 weeks before the duck died. Frank printed out the receipts without me even asking. Each one had an employee ID number, and the most recent receipt displayed Justin's ID in stark black and white. Grabbed the receipts from Frank and practically ran to my car. My hands shook on the wheel as I drove to Philip's office. This was the proof we needed. I burst into Philip's office 20 minutes later, texting him en route that I had crucial evidence. He had already cleared his desk, legal pad at the ready. I spread the 3 receipts before him, my finger jabbing at Justin's employee ID on the most recent one from 2 weeks before the duck died. Philip examined each one carefully, and for the first time since I'd hired him, a genuine smile touched his lips. This is exactly what we needed, he said. It puts the murder weapon directly in Justin's possession with documented proof. When I asked if this was enough to clear me, he explained it wasn't that simple, but it was powerful evidence that would pivot the investigation toward Justin. He immediately called Detective Braun, informing her we had purchasing records showing Justin ordered rat poison immediately before the duck's death. She agreed to bring Justin in for questioning that afternoon and asked us to bring the original receipts to the station. Philip and I arrived 2 hours later. Detective Braun met us in the lobby, examined the receipts closely, and nodded. This is good evidence, she confirmed. She told us Justin was on his way and we were welcome to wait. Philip said we would stay. He wanted to see how Justin reacted when confronted. He sat on uncomfortable plastic chairs in the waiting area. Justin arrived 30 minutes later, escorted by a uniformed officer, looking confused and annoyed. He didn't see me partially hidden behind a filing cabinet. Detective Braun took him into an interview room and closed the door. First hour passed in silence. Around the 90-minute mark, Justin's voice grew louder behind the door, defensive and angry. Philip leaned forward, listening intently, and whispered that Justin was likely being confronted with the receipts. Another 30 minutes passed, and Justin's shouting became audible, though the words were unclear. Philip squeezed my shoulder. This is a good sign, he said. Innocent people don't usually get this defensive. At the 3-hour mark, the interview room door flew open. Justin stormed out, his face crimson, fists clenched at his sides. He took 3 steps into the waiting area, saw me, and his eyes narrowed with pure rage. He pointed directly at me, screaming that I was trying to frame him because I got caught. He yelled that I was a liar and a murderer, that I had planted evidence. 2 officers moved swiftly to restrain him, telling him to calm down as he continued to shout over his shoulder that I wouldn't get away with this. They guided him, struggling, through the front doors, his shouts still echoing from the parking lot. My whole body trembled. Philip put a steadying hand on my arm. "That outburst," he said quietly, "just made him look extremely guilty." Detective Braun emerged from the interview room a few minutes later, looking satisfied. She sat down across from us and explained that Justin had denied ordering any rat poison, claiming someone must have stolen his ID credentials. His story about his whereabouts that morning had kept changing, and he couldn't provide a consistent explanation for why he deleted the security footage. She was now treating Justin as a serious suspect in the duck's death. Philip asked what came next. Detective Braun said she was requesting a search warrant for Justin's home and work computer to look for evidence of the footage deletion and any research about poisoning animals. She estimated the warrant would be granted in a few days, with the forensic search taking about a week. Philip warned me the process could still take weeks, but the investigation was finally focused on the right person. A wave of relief washed over me for the first time in weeks. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived at my apartment. It was a notice that Gerald's lawsuit was proceeding to the discovery phase. Inside was a massive list of 47 interrogatories from his attorney, Valeria Chamberlain. They demand detailed, sworn responses about my whereabouts the morning the duck died, my complete allergy medical history, every interaction I'd ever had with the duck, and my feelings toward Gerald. I called Philip immediately, and we spent the next 2 full days in his conference room, drafting responses. I had to relive every miserable moment of the past 3 months as I described each incident. Philip typed as I talked, stopping me occasionally to clarify or insist I stick to the facts. We documented every allergic reaction, every HR complaint, every time I came in early or left late to avoid the duck. It was emotionally exhausting. Philip explained we were also sending our own discovery requests to Gerald's attorney, asking for the duck's medical records, its support animal documentation, and critically, any communications Gerald had with Justin before or after the duck died. This process, he said, could reveal information that would help our case. A week passed with no updates. I was going stir-crazy in my apartment, suspended and powerless, checking my phone obsessively. Then on a Tuesday afternoon, Philip called, his voice charged with excitement. Detective Braun had just informed him of a major development. The forensic search of Justin's computer was complete. They had found his browser history from the week before the duck died. Justin had repeatedly searched for how to poison birds and foods toxic to waterfowl. "This is huge," Philip said. "It shows premeditation." I started crying with relief, my voice breaking as I asked if this meant I was cleared. Philip said we were very close. The detective was building a strong case against Justin, and my name was being removed from the primary suspect list. Days later, I was eating cereal when a breaking news alert flashed on my phone. Justin had been arrested and charged with animal cruelty, evidence tampering, and filing a false police report. A photo accompanied the article, showing him being led into the police station in handcuffs. The article mentioned my name, stating that new evidence had pointed to Justin as the actual perpetrator. Within minutes, my phone erupted with a constant buzz of text messages. Former coworkers sent apologies for assuming my guilt. People who had posted vile things about me on social media now messaged to say they were wrong. I didn't respond to any of them, too overwhelmed by the sudden shift. The next morning, a formal letter arrived from my company's HR department. I was no longer suspended and could return to work immediately, with full back pay for the time I'd missed. The letter was signed by someone from the legal department, not Evie Nash. An hour later, Evie herself called. Her voice was stiff and uncomfortable, clearly reading from a script prepared by legal. She offered a scripted apology full of phrases like regrettable misunderstanding and procedural oversight. I said little, my anger at her previous inaction still raw. After an awkward silence, she said she looked forward to seeing me back at the office. I simply said okay and hung up. Next morning, I walked into the office building, my stomach churning with anxiety. I badged through security and took the elevator up. When the doors opened on my floor, Sarah from accounting saw me, her eyes widening before she quickly turned and hurried in the opposite direction. As I headed toward my cubicle, I passed the break room where 3 people were getting coffee. Their conversation died instantly. One of them offered an exaggerated, fake smile and an overly enthusiastic wave. I nodded and kept walking. From a distance, my cubicle looked barren. As I got closer, I saw all my personal belongings had been haphazardly packed into a cardboard box sitting on my chair. My monitor, keyboard, stapler, and pens were all inside. A sticky note on top, in someone's unfamiliar handwriting, simply read, "Storage." I stood there, holding the box as people walked past without making eye contact. Jennifer from marketing speed-walked by and tossed a terse "Welcome back" over her shoulder without slowing down or looking at me. I set the box down and began the grim task of unpacking, my hands shaking slightly as I plugged my monitor back in. The entire floor was unnervingly quiet, the air thick with the sound of hushed whispers from nearby cubicles. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find Gerald standing there. His face went ghostly white, then flooded with a blotchy red that spread down his neck. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "Why are you back at work when my duck is still dead?" he demanded, his voice rising with each word. People began to stand up in their cubicles to watch. "You should be in jail. The company is protecting a murderer," his voice cracked, tears welling in his eyes. Before I could respond, Morris appeared and inserted himself between us, placing a firm hand on Gerald's shoulder. "Gerald, come with me," he said, his tone level. Being no room for argument. When Gerald tried to push past him, Morris held his ground. "We need to go to HR right now." Morris guided a still-yelling Gerald down the hallway, Gerald turning back repeatedly to glare at me. The other employees slowly sank back into their cubicles. I sat at my desk, my whole body trembling. Around lunchtime, my phone rang. It was Philip, and he sounded excited. He told me Gerald's attorney, Valeria Chamberlain, had just contacted him. He wanted to meet to discuss dropping the lawsuit. Apparently, she hadn't known about Justin's arrest until the previous day, and the new developments had caught her by surprise. Philip explained she was likely worried about her client suing the wrong person. When I asked if this meant it was over, he said not yet, but it was a very good sign. He had scheduled a meeting for the next afternoon at his office and instructed me to stay calm and let him do most of the talking. I hung up, feeling a genuine spark of hope for the first time in weeks. The next day, I drove to Philip's office and parked in the visitor lot. In the conference room, Gerald was already seated alongside Valeria, a sharp-looking woman in a dark suit with a stack of folders before her. Gerald looked terrible. His eyes were red and puffy, his hair unkempt, his shirt wrinkled. Philip and I sat across from them. Valeria began in a professional tone, outlining the recent developments in the criminal case. She stated that continuing the lawsuit against me would be difficult, given the evidence against Justin. Gerald interrupted her, his voice breaking. "I don't care about difficult. Someone needs to pay for what happened to my duck." Valeria placed a calming hand on his arm and asked him to let her finish. She explained that the forensic evidence and Justin's browser history created serious problems for their case. Gerald's hands, flat on the table, trembled. "Someone has to be held accountable," he insisted, his voice thick with emotion. Philip leaned forward, his voice calm and measured. "You're welcome to sue Justin instead," he said. "He actually committed the crime. He poisoned the duck and then tried to frame my client." He explained that pursuing me further would likely result in sanctions for filing a lawsuit without merit. Gerald's eyes filled with tears. He put his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "I just wanted someone to be held accountable for my loss," he wept. "I loved that duck. It helped me with my problems. Now it's gone and no one seems to care." Valeria handed him a tissue. The room fell silent except for his quiet sobs. I felt a pang of sympathy for him, even after everything he had put me through. His pain was raw and real. Before I could think better of it, I heard myself speaking. "I understand your grief," I said. The room's attention snapped to me. "Your duck made me sick for 3 months, but I never wanted it dead. I just wanted to be able to breathe in my own workplace." I took a slow breath. "I'm sorry that Justin's actions took away something you loved." A stunned silence filled the room. Valeria stared at me. Philip looked surprised. Gerald lifted his head, his red-rimmed eyes searching my face. "Why are you being nice to me?" he asked, his voice ragged with confusion. "I tried to destroy your life with this lawsuit." "Because hurt people," I replied softly. "I can see you've been suffering just like I have. Maybe we can both stop suffering now." Gerald's face crumpled. He began to cry again, but this time it was different, less angry, more purely sorrowful. Valeria cleared her throat and formally announced she was withdrawing the lawsuit. She slid the dismissal papers across the table to Gerald. He stared at them for a long moment, then picked up a pen with shaking hands and signed. After Gerald and Valeria had left, Philip reached across the table and shook my hand. "That," he said, "was the most grown-up thing I've seen in 20 years of practicing law." I didn't feel very grown-up. I just felt profoundly tired. A few weeks passed and Philip called with an update. Justin's attorney was seeking a plea deal. The evidence was overwhelming and pleading guilty to lesser charges was his best option. For me, it meant the case was essentially over. Justin would admit his guilt and the record would be cleared. Sat in my apartment after hanging up, feeling a strange mix of relief and lingering anger. Relief that it was ending, and anger that Justin had tried to ruin my life to save his own. The company launched an internal investigation into the entire handling of the situation. I met with people from the legal department, walking them through every complaint I had filed. A few weeks later, office gossip confirmed that Evie Nash had been demoted to a different position. A new HR director was hired from outside the company, who promptly sent a department-wide email about reviewing workplace safety policies and creating a better process for handling accommodation requests. Reading it gave me a small, cold sense of satisfaction. My desk was eventually returned to normal, and people began making hesitant eye contact again. Life awkwardly went on. And Morris called me into his office and closed the door. He looked uncomfortable as he sat down. "I should have pushed harder when you first complained about the duck," he admitted. "The company failed you by not taking your allergies seriously. I'm sorry for staying neutral when you needed someone to stand up for what was right." Then he slid a paper across his desk. It was a promotion to senior analyst, accompanied by a $12,000 annual raise. He called it compensation for what I had endured and recognition of my work. My savings account, decimated by Philip's retainer and my unpaid suspension, had only $3,000 left. I accepted the promotion and shook his hand. He looked immensely relieved. Weeks later, Philip called with the final news on Justin's case. The prosecutor had offered a plea deal, and Justin had taken it. He pleaded guilty to animal cruelty and evidence tampering. His sentence was 18 months of probation, 500 hours of community service, and a court order to pay Gerald $8,000 for the duck and emotional distress. Philip explained that Justin had faced real jail time if he had gone to trial, so this was his best possible outcome. When I asked if it was truly over, Philip confirmed it. The criminal case was closed and Gerald's lawsuit was dismissed. Sat on my couch after we hung up, feeling a weird emptiness. I had wanted justice and I had gotten it, but the satisfaction I expected was absent. I took the day off work to attend Justin's sentencing hearing. The courtroom was small and cold. Gerald sat in the front row with his lawyer. Justin sat at the defendant's table in a suit that seemed too large for him. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, Justin stood and read from a paper in his shaking hands. He apologized to Gerald for killing his duck and for the pain he had caused, saying he had made terrible choices. His voice cracked when he mentioned panicking and deleting the footage. He never once looked in my direction. The judge sentenced him according to the plea deal, and the entire proceeding was over in 10 minutes. As Justin walked out with his lawyer, I realized he was still furious with me, likely believing I had ruined his life by exposing him. Outside the courthouse, the sun was bright and warm. I was walking to my car when Gerald called my name. I turned to find him standing there, looking weary. He thanked me for not being malicious during the investigation, acknowledging that I could have made things much harder for him. He pulled out his phone and showed me a picture of a new duck, brown and white, almost identical to the first. He had adopted a new one named Quackers too. I smiled without thinking and told him I hoped this one would bring him comfort. He nodded, put his phone away, and we stood in silence for a moment, unsure of what else to say. Then we turned and walked to our separate cars. Back at the office the next week, I received an email from the new HR director. The company was implementing new policies for medical accommodations, including having all requests reviewed by an independent third party. They were also formally banning emotional support animals that triggered documented severe allergies in other employees. Reading through the new formal process, I felt a small sense of accomplishment. It wouldn't help me, but it might prevent someone else from enduring a similar ordeal. Naomi texted, asking if I wanted to get coffee. We met at a cafe near my apartment that Saturday. After talking about normal things for a while, she told me she had never doubted my innocence, reminding me again how I had cried when we had to put her cat down years earlier. We started meeting for coffee every weekend after that, our friendship slowly rebuilding. Began making jokes about the whole situation, calling me the Duck Whisperer. And for the first time, I could actually laugh about it. Philip's final bill arrived in the mail. I opened it with trepidation, expecting the worst, but it was for $11,000 instead of the original $15,000 retainer. A note explained that the case had resolved faster than anticipated, so he was reducing his fee. I wrote him a check that same day. My savings account was now nearly depleted, but I didn't care. His work had saved me from criminal charges and financial ruin. $11,000 felt like a cheap price for my freedom and reputation. I mailed the check with a thank you note, expressing my deep gratitude for everything he had done. The trauma of the false accusation, however, settled deep in my chest like a physical weight. I struggled to sleep, haunted by how close I had come to losing everything. A coworker mentioned that her therapist had helped her through a difficult time, so I found a therapist who specialized in trauma and booked an appointment. Her office smelled like lavender and had soft lighting. I told her the entire story from beginning to end. She listened without interruption, then told me my anger was valid and that rebuilding trust would take time. She gave me exercises for managing anxiety, and we scheduled weekly sessions. It helped immensely to talk to someone uninvolved and non-judgmental. 3 months after Justin's sentencing, Morris called me into his office again. He told me I was being promoted to senior analyst, this time with a significant $15,000 raise. He insisted it was based purely on merit and my work performance, having nothing to do with guilt or compensation. I thanked him and shook his hand, though I suspected the company also wanted to demonstrate they valued me after the nightmare they had put me through. The promotion felt good, but it was also a stark reminder of everything that had happened. Following month, Gerald transferred to a different department. It was better for both of us. I'd occasionally see him in the cafeteria, always looking at his phone. One day, I walked past his table and glimpsed his screen. It was a photo of Quackers 2 set as his wallpaper. The duck was swimming in a pond. Gerald looked up and we made eye contact. We exchanged a polite nod. Then Then I continued to get my food and he returned to his phone. It wasn't friendship, but it wasn't hatred either. It was simply an acknowledgement between two people who had survived a terrible ordeal. A few weeks after everything settled, the local news ran a follow-up segment on the case. The anchor explained how Justin had been convicted and how I had been exonerated. My phone started buzzing within an hour of the broadcast. A flood of apologies came from former coworkers. A guy from accounting sent a long message about how terrible he felt for avoiding me. A neighbor from 2 doors down knocked on my door to apologize for crossing the street whenever she saw me. I accepted every apology and thanked them, but I kept a mental list of those who had stayed completely silent. The people who had never publicly doubted me, but had also never spoken up in my defense. I didn't hold grudges, but I remembered. A therapist suggested I look into a support group for people who had been falsely accused. I found one that met on Tuesday nights at a community center across town. The first meeting I attended had 8 people sitting in a circle of folding chairs. A woman named Carol had spent 2 years fighting charges before security footage proved she was in another state when the crime occurred. A man named Robert lost his job and his house before DNA evidence finally cleared him. Hearing their stories made me feel less alone. Some of them had lost everything before the truth emerged. Robert was still trying to rebuild his credit 3 years later. Carol's marriage had ended during her legal battle. I realized I had been relatively lucky that Philip found the evidence when he did. Another 6 months and I might have lost my apartment or ended up with a criminal record. I started attending the group regularly. 6 months after Justin's sentencing, I got a call from Detective Braun. She told me Justin had violated his probation by sending threatening messages to Gerald about the money he owed. Gerald had saved the messages and reported them immediately. The court revoked Justin's probation and sentenced him to 90 days in county jail. I felt a strange mix of emotions, a flicker of pity that anyone was going to jail, but a stronger sense of grim satisfaction that Justin's own actions kept digging his hole deeper. He had killed an innocent animal, tried to destroy my life to cover it up, and now was facing real consequences because he couldn't control his anger even after receiving a lenient sentence. Returning to work full-time after my suspension ended, I noticed an immediate, profound difference. For the first time in months, I could breathe normally. My eyes didn't constantly water, and my throat didn't tighten every morning. I hadn't fully grasped the constant physical suffering I had endured during those 3 months with the duck. My body had been in a perpetual state of allergic reaction, and I had simply pushed through because HR told me to manage my symptoms. I kept my EpiPen in my desk drawer even though it was no longer needed. Every time I opened the drawer for a pen, I saw it. A stark reminder of how serious the situation had been and how one severe reaction could have sent me to the hospital, or worse. Philip called me into his office to discuss a settlement he had negotiated with my company. They were offering $40,000 to resolve my potential wrongful suspension claim. Philip explained they wanted to avoid a lawsuit regarding how they had handled my accommodation requests and the subsequent investigation. I signed the papers that same afternoon. Half the money went directly into my savings to replenish what I'd spent on legal fees. The other half I decided to use for a real vacation. I hadn't taken time off in 3 years except for the suspension. I booked a 2-week trip to Colorado and flew out the following month. The mountains were immense, beautiful, and completely free of birds. I spent my days hiking trails and breathing the clean, cold air deeply without a single worry about my throat closing up. I would sit on rocks overlooking vast valleys and feel a profound gratitude to be alive, free, and finally vindicated. No one in Colorado knew anything about duck murders or false accusations. I was just another hiker enjoying the scenery. Those 2 weeks reset something in my mind that had been fractured since the investigation began. Day after I returned, Morris called me into his office. He told me the company was assigning me to lead a major client project, one that could significantly advance my career if I handled it well. It involved coordinating between 3 departments and presenting directly to executives. Morris admitted he had specifically fought for me to get this opportunity, driven by guilt for not supporting me more during the investigation. Wanted to make up for staying neutral when I needed people to believe in my innocence. I thanked him and accepted the project. It felt good to have my career moving forward again, not just surviving. Naomi and I continued our Saturday coffee meetings. After a few weeks, she tentatively suggested we try dating again. We had broken up 6 months before the duck situation began, but surviving the false accusations together had rebuilt a powerful connection. She said watching me handle the nightmare with honesty and integrity had reminded her why she'd fallen for me in the first place. We agreed to take things slowly and prioritize open communication. Our first official date was dinner at an Italian restaurant we used to frequent. The atmosphere was comfortable and familiar, yet it felt new. We talked about our futures instead of rehashing our pasts, and for the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely hopeful about where our relationship was headed. Full year after Quackers died, I received an unexpected email from Gerald. The subject line simply read, "Checking in." He wrote that he was doing better and hoped I was, too. He had started volunteering at an animal sanctuary on weekends, and working with rescued creatures was helping him process his grief in healthier ways. He said he finally understood that I had never wanted his duck to die, and he apologized for the lawsuit and for exacerbating my suffering when I was a victim, too. I wrote back, telling him I was genuinely glad he had found a positive outlet for his feelings. Gerald, I realized, had been a victim of Justin's actions just as I had. The HR department then asked me to speak at a mandatory training session about workplace accommodations. They wanted me to share my experience to help employees understand why it's critical to take medical needs seriously. Standing before 40 coworkers and recounting the worst months of my life was profoundly uncomfortable, but I agreed, hoping it might prevent someone else from enduring a similar ordeal. Explained how my allergy complaints had been ignored until the situation exploded into a criminal investigation. Afterward, several people thanked me for my vulnerability. A woman from marketing confided that she'd been afraid to report her own accommodation issue, but my story gave her the courage to speak up. About 6 months after Justin's sentencing, I heard through an old coworker that he had finished his probation without further violations. He had moved to Arizona and was working as a warehouse supervisor, completely out of the tech field. I hoped he had learned something from the whole mess, that he had destroyed 2 lives because a duck ate his sandwich. Part of me wanted to believe people could change, but mostly I just felt a profound relief that he was gone and I would never have to see him again. My promotion to team lead came through about 3 weeks after the employee training session. Morris called me into his office and told me I would be managing 4 analysts starting the following month. My first act as a manager was to assure my new team that my door was always open if they had any concerns. I was determined to create an environment where people felt safe raising issues before they could explode into a crisis, unlike what had happened to me. With my team members, Sarah and Ren, thanked me privately for this approach. Sarah confessed her previous manager had ignored her concerns about a coworker's behavior until it became a major HR problem. Ren said he appreciated that I actually listened when he talked about workload stress instead of just telling him to push through. Managing people was harder than I had anticipated, but it was also more rewarding when I saw my team succeeding and feeling supported. Naomi had been dating again for 8 months when she suggested we look for an apartment together. We spent 3 weekends touring places before settling on a 2-bedroom unit in a newer building across town. It had big windows, updated appliances, and felt like a true fresh start for both of us. We moved in on a Saturday in June. That first night, surrounded by unpacked boxes, we sat on the floor eating pizza. Naomi showed me photos of cats from the local shelter. I reminded her I was allergic to birds, not cats, and she grinned and said she knew. We adopted an orange tabby cat the next weekend and named him Pumpkin. I joked that at least cats and I got along, unlike certain waterfowl, and Naomi laughed so hard she snorted. Pumpkin quickly became my constant companion when I worked from home, sleeping on my desk and occasionally walking across my keyboard during video calls. 2 years after the duck incident, a lawyer named Rebecca Maxwell contacted me through LinkedIn. She was handling a case where her client faced false accusations of sabotaging a coworker's project, and she asked if I'd be willing to consult, noting similarities to my experience. I met her at a coffee shop and spent 3 hours walking her through everything I'd learned. I emphasized the critical importance of documenting everything, hunting for inconsistencies in the evidence, and finding overlooked witnesses. Rebecca took extensive notes and recorded our conversation with my permission. She later told me my insights about how false accusations spread through workplace gossip were especially valuable. Her client was eventually cleared when security footage revealed a different employee had accessed the sabotaged files. Rebecca sent me a thank you gift basket, noting I had helped save her client's career. Knowing I could use my nightmare to help someone else navigate a similar ordeal made all the suffering feel slightly less pointless. About 6 months later, the company created a new role, Employee Wellness Advocate. The HR director asked if I'd be interested in taking on the additional responsibility. The position involved reviewing company policies around worker safety and accommodations, ensuring different employee needs were balanced fairly. I'd maintain my management duties, but devote about 10 hours a week to this advocacy work. It came with a small salary increase, and more importantly, the chance to prevent situations like mine from happening to others. I accepted immediately. My first project was reviewing the emotional support animal policy. I recommended changes to better handle cases where one person's accommodation conflicted with another's medical needs. The new policy required an independent medical review and established a formal process for finding solutions that worked for everyone involved. Ran into Detective Braun entirely by chance at a downtown coffee shop. We ended up sitting together for 20 minutes. She told me my case had taught her to look beyond the obvious suspect and to question her initial assumptions more carefully in every investigation since. I thanked her for investigating Justin properly instead of just closing the case with me as the culprit. She said that was what good police work required. We exchanged business cards before parting ways. 3 years after everything happened, I was assigned to a major project team that included Gerald. My stomach sank when I saw his name on the roster, but I resolved to handle the situation with professionalism. Our first team meeting was awkward, with both of us carefully avoiding direct eye contact while the project manager outlined our objectives. However, as we began collaborating on tasks through email and project management software, keeping our communication strictly focused on work deliverables, the tension gradually eased. About 2 months into the project, we had to collaborate directly on a client presentation. We met in a conference room and spent 4 hours building slides and rehearsing our talking points. The presentation itself went smoothly. Afterwards, Gerald told me I had done good work on the financial analysis section. I thanked him and complimented the depth of his market research. We never became friends or discussed personal matters, but we reached a place of mutual professional respect that felt like true closure. We could work together effectively without pretending the past had never happened. Philip and I stayed in regular contact after my case concluded. He'd email every few months to check in. About a year after my case closed, he began referring clients to me when they needed advice about workplace advocacy or handling false accusations. I would meet with them and share what I had learned, and several subsequently hired Philip as their attorney based on my recommendation. Our relationship evolved from a purely attorney-client dynamic into a genuine professional friendship built on mutual respect. He invited Naomi and me to his daughter's college graduation party, and we later invited him to our own engagement celebration. He told me once that my case had reminded him why he became a lawyer, to help people fight for truth when everyone else had given up on them. 5 years after the duck incident, I was promoted to director of operations. The role came with a significant salary increase, a larger team to manage, and direct reports who were managers themselves. Sitting in my new office with its window view of downtown, I realized my career had grown beyond anything I had imagined before the ordeal. The experience of being falsely accused, as traumatic as it was, had taught me invaluable skills: how to stay calm under extreme pressure, how to gather evidence systematically, and how to fight for the truth even when everyone doubted me. These abilities made me a more decisive leader. My team respected me because they knew I had endured something terrible and emerged stronger. The incident that had nearly destroyed my career had, paradoxically, become the foundation for my success. Naomi and I got engaged on a Saturday evening in October at the same park where we'd had our first date years before. I had planned it for weeks, even arranging for a photographer to hide nearby. When I got down on one knee and opened the ring box, Naomi began crying before I could even finish the question. She said, "Yes," and we held each other as the sun set behind the trees. At night, back in our apartment with Pumpkin purring between us, I told Naomi that surviving the false accusations together had strengthened our relationship in a way ordinary dating never could. She had seen me at my absolute lowest, suspended, facing criminal charges and a massive lawsuit, and had chosen to stand by me anyway. That meant everything. She said she'd never doubted my innocence because she knew my character, knew I could never hurt an animal no matter how much it made me suffer. We started planning our wedding that very night, talking about venues and guest lists, and I felt a genuine, unburdened excitement for our future together. These days, I don't think about the duck investigation often. Sometimes, while working on a report at my desk, I'll remember how my eyes used to swell shut or the terror I felt when the detective showed up at my apartment. Those memories still feel heavy, but they no longer control my life. I built something good from all that pain. The experience taught me how to stand up for myself and fight for the truth. I use those skills daily as a director, and my team respects me because they know the strength it took to overcome that chapter. The trauma shaped me, but it doesn't define me. I'm proud of how I handled everything, from hiring Philip to confronting Justin to finding compassion for Gerald even after his lawsuit. Looking back, I'm genuinely grateful the truth emerged when it did. If not for Justin's incriminating search history, I might have faced jail time or financial ruin. I had people who believed in me when it mattered most: Philip, who fought tirelessly; Naomi, who stood by me; and eventually Detective Braun, who was willing to investigate deeper. Life is truly good now in ways I couldn't have fathomed during those awful 3 months. My career is thriving, my relationship with Naomi is stronger than ever, and every morning I walk into my office and breathe freely, without my throat closing or my eyes swelling shut. I never take that simple freedom for granted. I can sit at my desk all day without fear, without constantly looking over my shoulder for a waddling duck. That simple freedom to breathe in my own workplace means everything.